Congressman, thank you so much for being here this morning. We're really thrilled to have you here. And we have quite a bit of ground to cover in a limited amount of time. And let me start with, you know that this group, the councils of the World Affairs Councils of America, have chosen 6 topics. U.S. economic competitiveness, U.S. education, globally, Middle East, China, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and U.S. energy policy as the 6 key issues that will be confronting the President and the United States into 2013. Give us your perspective on those 6 issues. Are those the ones you would select? Would you add something to it? Would you take something out of it?
Sure. Well, first of all, if I could just first thank you for the invitation to be here, and thank the World Affairs Council of America for all you do to bring these issues to people throughout the country. My wife, Catherine, actually was formerly the head of the Washington World Affairs Council, and my wife and I first met. We were arguing about different national security and policy issues at the Kennedy School. And I'm a foreign service brat, meaning my father served in the foreign service. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan. We lived in India, Sri Lanka, and Turkey. So foreign policy issues, the connection between our domestic issues and foreign policy issues have always been of interest to me. And I met your immediate past president of the World Affairs Council, Lori Murray, who is just speaking to, when she and I were both working for members of Congress who served on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. She worked for Nancy Kassenbaum, a moderate Republican from Kansas, and I worked for Mac Mathias, who was a moderate Republican from the state of Maryland. Those particular moderate members are endangered species, unfortunately, in parts of the Congress today. Look, I think that I looked at the issues. I think that you touched on the key issues. I guess I would expand on some. So, for example, with respect to energy policy, energy strategy,
I'm glad you will,
because
no one's referenced.
Well, if that is, I mean, I think, look, this is not, it is both the immediate and the long-term issue. That's the issue of global climate change. So, to the extent that your energy policy piece envisions that part of the conversation, I think it's important. Obviously, we had a big discussion about energy policy in the presidential campaign. Both candidates said they were for all of the above energy strategy, meaning that we should pursue all our energy alternatives. I agree with that, but part of our goal as we look at that, it should be, in my view, to begin both domestically but also with our international partners to try and address the issue of global climate change. I think it's very clear, according to the broad scientific community, that it's already having a very real impact in our country and around the world. With respect to competitiveness, which I think really has to be a very important focus for us, and focusing on renewing American manufacturing with some of the new cutting-edge technologies, I think there's lots of opportunity for there. That's a broad area, of course. I mean, it goes from everywhere from education, and even focus on early education to K through 12, to making sure we have affordable college opportunities, to doing everything we can to invest and streamline the processes for some of our most cutting-edge technologies. My district is home to the National Institutes of Health. The United States has had a long time advantage in the area of biomedicine, but our international competitors are hot on our heels, and we'd be making a big mistake to sacrifice our focus, our past focus in those areas. I would also say that the competitiveness area should include immigration reform as part of that conversation. We currently have an immigration system that welcomes inviting people here to get a higher education, but then makes it very difficult for some people to stay here and create jobs and opportunity right here in our country. Now, that's a piece of a larger immigration conversation, but the reality is, and you know, people like Bill Gates have mentioned this many times, they've often had conferences with Microsoft in the past where they couldn't get visas to bring some of the people into the United States, and they had to have them in Canada and Vancouver. So I would just say each of these topics, I think, is on target But within, for example, competitiveness, our immigration reform and having a clear picture of how we move forward has got to be part of that conversation. So those are just the two.
Well, I'm very glad you picked up on those because we haven't this morning really discussed in greater detail energy or education. So let me go a little bit deeper. On energy, what do you envision? Are we going to have a national policy? Are we going to, what kind of path do you see us going forward with? And what is achievable in Congress, given some of the different viewpoints over what should be the priorities there?
Sure. Well, with energy policy, there are some things that have happened in the last couple of years that are greatly beneficial to the country. That have happened, obviously, through discovery and the private sector. Natural gas being a great new source of energy for the United States, obviously helping drive down the cost of manufacturing now and into the future. So that's a big opportunity. I'm a strong believer that the federal government has a role in investing in research. We did it, of course, through DARPA on the defense side, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. And I believe the Department of Energy has a very important role in looking at continuing cutting-edge technologies in renewable energy and energy efficiency. I mean, there are two sides, of course, of the energy equation, right? One is trying to find the energy we need. The other, of course, is using our existing energy most efficiently. And so we have an interest in tackling both sides of the equation. The President made a major decision not that long ago to dramatically improve the fuel efficiency of the U.S. automobile fleet over a period of time, which will save significant amounts of energy and the amount of oil we have to import. It did get a lot of attention at the time, but that's an important part of the equation. So on energy efficiency, as well as focusing on renewable energy, and at the same time developing our natural resources like natural gas. So the second part of the question, of course, is where do you draw the line in terms of the federal government's role in research, and then trying to assist some new companies. Now, there was a lot of talk in the campaign, for example, about Solyndra. And whenever the American government makes these kind of investments, there are going to be some that don't turn out right. And the issue in the energy space for these new industries is what's the appropriate role for the federal government beyond basic research. And I think that just like any new industry, there is a role for providing some incentives until these industries become more mature. I mean, once an industry becomes more mature, I don't think there's any reason to provide that kind of assistance. But whether usually in the form of tax credits, tax incentives, that kind of thing. But again, that's where you draw the line is an important debate. Certainly not big in the United States government don't have that stock in the company or anything like that, not at all. But the issue is whether or not, when it comes to that early research area, which I do believe we should be focused on, to what extent we go with it.
Is part of the goal also reducing U.S. dependence on energy sources abroad? We hear that a lot. Do you think that will also be part of the calculation?
No, that's a very important part. A very important part is reducing, obviously, we have a heavy reliance on foreign oil, especially. So that has to be part of the calculation. The other is over a period of time trying to move away from the most polluting carbon forms of energy, which are obviously contributing to global climate change. But you have to make these transitions in a thoughtful way.
Let's go to education, because Senator Warner made a reference to it, certainly in the context of the importance of education and the growing of businesses, training. But expand that out a bit, because you just in your opening comments made some, I think, key comments about also our standing and our educational system. This is of great interest to this audience because this was a topic that was key for last year. It's It's key for this year. We also have a scholarship program. There are scholars here in the audience. Talk about that. What would you like to see as being changed, and what do we need to do? How can it be achieved in a bipartisan way?
Well, there are two issues in education. One is ensuring the appropriate resources are available, and the other is reforming education and trying to make sure that we are providing the best opportunities for our kids. I do think that the President's so-called Race to the Top program has provided important incentives for school systems around the country to begin to focus on standards and accountability. I think everyone who knows there was a bipartisan bill passed not that long ago during the Bush administration, No Child Left Behind, which was controversial in many ways, but there were some good aspects of that in my view. And one very important aspect of it was trying to establish standards that we would expect every child to be able to try and meet. Because before No Child Left Behind, there were many school systems that would hide behind the map of averages, right? You might have a school where on average students were doing pretty well, but it masked the fact that there were many children in that school system that were not doing very well. So the emphasis in No Child Left Behind, focusing on lifting all standards for all kids, I thought was a very important national statement. Now, how you encourage schools to get there, to what extent, how you incentivize that, how you penalize it. If you want to penalize schools that don't meet those benchmarks is another question. There's a lot of discussion about what the appropriate measurement is for progress in a school, and we've had lots of discussions in Congress about changing the way we measure that so it doesn't penalize schools who are actually making sure all their students improve, even though some of the students haven't yet met benchmarks. I mean, for those of you who follow this issue, I don't want to know what I'm talking about, we can go into greater detail, but there are different ways to measure progress in a school. And some of the ways we measure progress in No Child Left Behind actually created some bad incentives. So, for example, for kids who the school system never thought could meet the target standard, school systems didn't have a big incentive to really focus on them. And for kids who were doing really well and already had, sort of exceeded the levels of the benchmark, there wasn't a lot of attention or incentive to give them attention either. So there are different ways to improve process. Look, we have in this country a system of primarily locally education, local school systems, local community states. The federal government, it seems to me, has an important role in setting what we now have as voluntary standards. And the good news is that a lot of the states have moved toward trying to meet those voluntary standards. Because, and there's an important debate in the country about the appropriate role of the federal government in setting standards and to what extent they should be, whether they should be mandatory, whether they should be voluntary. Look, my view is with Race to the Top and the current movement in states toward trying to meet these important national standards, we are headed in the right direction. But we have a long way to go, and in a country as vast as ours, where we have a primarily locally based school systems, it's important to figure out exactly what the role of the federal government is. So I'm of the view that the federal government should constantly be pushing local school systems and states to try and achieve important standards, not just because it's important that every child have a great educational opportunity, but it gets right to the competitiveness argument. It's obviously in our national interest to make sure that we have an education system where people can compete. The last thing I will say about this is, in the past, community colleges have been ignored in our country. I think they can play a really important role because you're seeing in many states, for example, my state of Maryland, much better partnerships between our community college systems and our local businesses. represent an area which, as I said, is home to NIH. We also have a lot of biotech businesses. And in our community colleges, we have lots of important programs to help train individuals for jobs in these local companies. So I think a lot more creativity around training in these kind of partnerships would serve.
I'm going to suggest to people, I'm going to ask the Congressman another question, but if we have a couple of questions, come up to the mic so we save time because we have limited windows. So come up to the mic and we'll catch them if you have a question. But meanwhile, let me ask you about the national debt. That's something we discussed earlier this morning, and just want to hear your thoughts about what you see as the next steps. How is this, are we going to be able to balance the budget, and what's the way forward? The Senator did spend some time on that.
Right, well this is a huge issue, and I heard some of Senator Warner's remarks, and Senator Warner and I are very much on the same page when it comes to these issues. I serve as the senior Democrat in the House Budget Committee. And we have to do two things, and we need to do them now. One is to take some measures to accelerate to the extent we can our recovery. The economy still remains relatively weak, although obviously it's growing, but it's growing at a relatively slow pace. So we need to make sure at the very least that we do no harm, that we don't take actions that would put a brake on the recovery, and to the extent possible, take some decisions that could help boost job growth and economic activity. The one clear area I think we can move forward, we should move forward in, is the area of greater national infrastructure investments, roads, bridges, transitways, broadband, a whole lot of other areas where there hasn't been a proposal on the table to try and dramatically increase that investment. It also goes to the national competitiveness issue. With respect to the fiscal cliff, we need to resolve it. There's no question. There are two big pieces. One is the sequester. The other is the tax piece. With respect to the sequester, I agree with Senator Warner. We should be able to come up with a plan, at least on a temporary basis, like 6-month basis, to come up with an alternative way to reduce the deficit while we then negotiate a longer-term plan, long-term deficit reduction plan. I've always said the framework of the Simpson-Bowles Commission and some of the other bipartisan commissions is the right way to go. Argue about the specifics, but we should set as our goal the overall deficit reduction targets over time that they have, and their mix of budget cuts and revenue. And as everyone in this room knows, the question about whether or not you'll have real revenue as part of that is a very important subject of debate throughout the presidential election. There were lots of issues that were not discussed in the presidential election, but this was not the topic that was ignored. This was a major part of the discussion in the presidential election. The president said he supported a balanced approach to reducing the deficit. We need a combination of budget cuts. And I would remind everybody, last year, as part of the Budget Control Act, we actually did $1 trillion in cuts over 10 years. You have to make sure they hold, but that was $1 trillion in cuts. That's not the sequester. That's part of the sequester. And then we said, well, we've got to figure out a way to get additional cuts over a period of time. And so far, we've really not seen a real willingness on the part of our Republican colleagues in the House to deal with the revenue piece. Now, Speaker Boehner yesterday made some remarks that, depending on what he meant, could provide some hope. But I would just point out that during the presidential debates, when Mitt Romney was asked whether he would accept an agreement that contained $10 in cuts, a $1 in revenue, he said absolutely not. Just to be clear, the Simpson-Bowles recommendations, it all depends on your baselines and how you count, but roughly they had between $2 and $3 worth of cuts to $1 worth of revenue. So you can see that your starting point is rejecting $10 in cuts to $1 revenue. It's hard to have it's hard to have a compromise. And what we need is a compromise. Senator Warner made it exactly right. We don't have a winner-take-all system. We have a system that will only work when you have divided government and people are willing to compromise. And compromise doesn't mean finding common ground. I mean, as you heard from this election, there is not a whole lot of common ground on these issues. Compromise means accepting some things that you don't like, both sides. And these are tough decisions. A compromise will be tough because people have strongly held views. But if people come into the conversation unwilling to compromise on these things, it's going to be really hard. And we do have, again, in these bipartisan proposals, since the goals are diminishing, we do have some picture of what the final bipartisan compromise would look like. You know, I said at the beginning, I used to work for Senator Mathias. He was a moderate Republican from Maryland. He's, in my view, a great role model for people who will have bipartisan. My opponent in this election disagreed. He didn't think that a Republican member of Congress, who I worked for, was a good role model because I guess he thought he compromised too much. So, there you go.
Let's take, Congressman, let's take these two questions, and I ask you both to be brief. We're going to take them together, and so he can respond, and then I'll do a closing, okay? Would you have me where one? Then we'll take three, and thank you. I apologize if they're standing and blocking a little bit. Go right ahead. We're going to take all three, please. Introduce yourself.
Maxwell Bonnie, Global Affairs Council, to bring it back to energy policy, OPEC announced earlier today that they were tempering demand for crude production over the next 4 to 10 years based on technologies in shale extraction. Can you speak to it all, how domestic policy will be affected by sort of our
OPEC announced today what?
That they were tempering demand for crude oil based on improved technologies for shale extraction. Can you speak to domestic policy in terms of our shale here and how that will affect what you think?
Sure. Look, as I said, I think there are.
Do you mind if we take the two?
Oh, no.
And then we'll take you. Go ahead, please. I shale. That was the question about shale. Yes.
I'm from the St. John's College of Santa Fe, and I'd like to bring it back to the education question. You mentioned quite a bit meeting or even reaching beyond the national standards in terms of competitiveness, and I wonder, how would you define competitiveness, and is it really in terms of those national standards? Because it seems to me that the national standards, should be at least reached by everyone in the policy of no child left behind. So I wonder, where is there a sort of maybe more creative or more intuitive definition of the competitiveness of the education of the United States?
Let's take these two, and then we'll get yours.
Well, with respect to energy policy, as I said, I supported all of the energy strategy. When it comes to the development of our domestic natural resources, we have a very vigorous oil production industry, natural gas production industry. We obviously had the terrible experience in the Gulf many years ago, but the reality is now you've got a lot more activity there than you did ever before. So I'm for pursuing these. Obviously, when it comes to certain new technologies for developing these resources, we need to make sure we do it in an environmentally sound way. So I'm in favor of moving ahead. I'm also in favor of making sure during that process that we have some standards and guidelines that will apply to make sure that we protect people's water supply and basic environmental standards. But so I'm not in the camp that says don't develop these resources, but I do believe that as we develop them, we need to make sure that we do it in a smart way, environmentally smart way. With respect to education standards, again, the question goes to what the federal role is in education. And I come down in the camp that we should, in this globally competitive world, try and have the federal government exercise its influence in this area in a way that encourages states to improve their standards. Now, how you measure, and I certainly agree that our goal has to be to make sure that every child in the school system is challenged with the highest standards, which is why I say that we need to change some of the ways we measure progress in these schools to make sure they have incentive to educate, make sure they're paying attention to every child, since it's important that we continue to measure the performance of every child. I think when there's no doubt that we need to, in my view, focus more on the STEM areas, right? So science, technology, engineering, math. I believe that everybody should be able to pursue whatever field they're interested in. But if you look at the areas of job growth over the next 10 years, I think those areas have great potential, and we are not graduating as many students in those areas as many of our competitors, our economic competitors around the world. So I do think, to the extent that the federal government can encourage greater focus in those areas, it will benefit us from the international competitors point of view.
You've really run over time. I'm going to give you a very 30 second.
Okay, we heard from
and introduce yourself.
Bill Clifford of World Boston. We heard from former Congressman Weber that it's right that we have left, the administration has left the military option on the table with respect to Iran. But he doesn't think, actually, that it's a credible option. So, is our military option vis-a-vis Iran credible? Does how the administration went after bin Laden inform that credibility? And do you sense that the administration and Congress has the imagination to exert the right calculus of pressure on Iran that is neither let them build the nuclear weapons nor go for the military option?
Well, your first part of your question, I think it is credible, because I think when the President of the United States says very clearly that that's an option on the table, I think the President means it when he says it, and as you indicated, the President has, I think, demonstrated he will exercise force in a judicious manner, but he will exercise force to protect our interests and the interests of our allies. So I do think it's credible. I also think that the President, despite a lot of things that were said by the opposition during this election, has succeeded in rallying international support to impose very tough sanctions on Iran. It obviously wouldn't do any good for the United States to impose economic sanctions on Iran alone. We don't have any economic relationship with Iran. The only way these work is to get the rest of the world on board. And the way the President was able to get the rest of the world on board was by saying that military option is the last resort, not the first resort, and that the President is going to try all other measures first, which is exactly what our allies, what most people would like to see. Most people would like to see use of force as a last resort. And as a result of that, he was able to get the international community, especially our European allies, to put economic pressure on Iran. Now, that has obviously helped to bring them to the table. Whether or not, at the end of the day, it will persuade them to abandon any hope of a nuclear weapons program remains to be seen. But it is an ongoing conversation. And I do believe the Iranians recognize that if we fail to get some kind of negotiated solution here, that there's a very real prospect that they would face some kind of intervention.
And the last question I've asked everyone this morning, can we govern? Are we going to see more bipartisanship? Are we going to see this polarization subside?
Well, that, of course, is the million-dollar question coming out of this election, and I would point out in that respect that groups like Standard & Poor's and Moody's, when they do these assessments of U.S. creditworthiness, they're not making their assessments based on the fundamentals of the U.S. economy. The fundamentals of the U.S. economy are strong given the right leadership. And the question, whenever they make these assessments, they go to the fact that we have, as you indicated, an inability to move forward on some of these key issues in Washington. It goes back to the earlier question about willingness to compromise. And as I said, we have before us a number of blueprints of what that compromise would look like.
So would you say yes?
Well, I tell you what, that if the Speaker of the House were tomorrow to come out and say, look, I also support the basic framework of these bipartisan commissions. You know, he doesn't have to agree with every detail. I don't either. But if the Speaker of the House were to say, I support the kind of framework for an agreement that's been put forward by these bipartisan groups and some goals for diminishing, that would give me hope. So I have to say that the jury's still out, and there's a real discussion post-election, especially right now in the Republican Party, and we'll have to see how it resolves itself. I mean, I was just listening on the way in to a conversation of some of the more conservative elements of the Republican Party, the Tea Party wing. They think that the reason they lost was they had too moderate a candidate. Well, I'm just right. I'm just reporting. This is and I can tell you this conversation is going to happen in the House Republican caucus. Look, both parties obviously after elections try to learn whatever lessons, but given the outcome of this election, there is already a debate going on. And so my answer to that question is which part of the Republican Party will win that debate? If the lesson is that Mitt Romney had to go so far to the right during the primary that it made it difficult to appeal to a broad cross-section of American people, that's one solution. That would be, from my perspective, a good result, because I think it's important that we have more members like the member I used to work with, Senator Mathias, the member that Lori used to work with, Senator Tassanon. And you have to have, obviously, willingness on the Democratic side to compromise as well, but Senator Warner is a good example of somebody. I share the same outlook as Senator Warner on these issues. But you got to have a partner. So I hope that debate within the House Republican caucus resolves itself in a way that allows us to move forward.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for coming.